India first. As India rises to the head table of world affairs, India's global leadership also spells the rise of Global South. With Union External Affairs Minister Dr. S. Jaishankar.
All right, let's put our hands together for External Affairs Minister Dr. S. Jaishankar. His unparalleled diplomatic acumen and strategic vision has been instrumental in shaping India's foreign policy in an era of unprecedented change and complexity. Please, let's give him a huge round of applause. And let me also now call upon stage TV9 Network's MD CEO Barun Das to kindly felicitate our guest and Union Minister.
Thank you so much, sir.
And it's now time to start this session. May I please call on stage TV9 Network's Nishant and Aditya Raj Kaul. Please come and moderate this very key session here for us this evening.
So, ladies and gentlemen, the Power Pact session has really begun now. And we have amongst us somebody that you've been waiting to hear for the last 2 days, External Affairs Minister Dr. S. Jaishankar. Certainly needs no introduction. Over the last many, many decades, he's been a diplomat representing India all across the globe. He's been an envoy, an ambassador to several countries. And of course, in the last few years, representing India, the changing dynamic foreign policy of India, the paradigm shift that has been brought in the foreign policy has been led, in fact, by Dr. S. Jaishankar. A round of applause to welcome the dignitary for his efforts, for his courage of conviction, and the way he has led the entire effort. Thank you very much, sir. The session theme today is Rise of the Global South. And you've been very vociferously speaking about it, particularly in the last 2 years. We've seen Global South being used repeatedly over the last many decades, 1955 onwards perhaps. But what has changed really? And you know, in my hands is this book that you've just released, Why Bharat Matters. And perhaps you should get this copy very soon. This was a hot topic discussed recently at the Raisina Dialogue as well. Why Bharat Matters? Why is it important? And has India not only positioned itself, but just like Tony Abbott mentioned earlier this morning, that India is leading indeed the Global South?
Well, first of all, thank you. It's a great pleasure to be here. And I think the sofa is a bit outsized for me, but it's okay. I'll try and fill the space. 2 questions. One, why the Global South? And secondly, why Bharat Matters? Why the Global South? What has been happening in the last few years is at one level, you know, the world's changing. The more dominant powers are less dominant today. And as part of that change, many countries who would broadly qualify to be in the Global South, India is one, Indonesia is one. You have, you know, other parts of ASEAN, some of the big countries in Africa, Latin, Brazil, Argentina, Mexico. So these countries today count for more, they assert themselves more, and they want to share in the conversation. So it's like a company, you know, there are more shareholders, but the management needs to recognize that there are more shareholders. So that's one. The second is actually the traumas of the last few years. You know, you had this devastating thing called COVID. You know, many of us have come through it. But as someone who travels very extensively, I've been to places which haven't come through it, you know, where the damage, you know, to governance, the damage to the societal fabric, they've taken such a body blow that they're still kind of reeling from that. On top of that, the ups and downs of the global economy, they saw, okay, global inflation has gone up, debt has gone up, trade has been disrupted. Then you had the Ukraine conflict, okay? And the Ukraine conflict had very strong second-order effects, energy prices, food prices, fertilizer prices. Now you're seeing the Middle East, you know, and again, the trade disruptions, the possibility. So what is happening is a lot of these countries feel, look, we are the people who are really suffering. But when there are big global meets, it's like they're you know, we don't count. They are discussing a different world out there. So there's enormous sort of, I would say, actually use the word anger today in a lot of these countries. So when we were preparing for the G20, I heard personally, and so did the Prime Minister, from many countries who said, look, you know, we expect you. You are India. You understand our pain. You've been there. I mean, because, you know, as former colonies, there's a certain bonding which comes from that. So we expect you to speak up for us. Now, we could have, you know, just stood there and said, okay, you know, we heard from people, but Prime Minister felt, let's actually gather everybody together and hear them out, and then kind of distill the essence of that, and then put it before the G20, and urge the G20 saying, look, we speak here, when we did our Global South Summit, we had 125 countries there. So when we spoke to the to the G20, we were not only speaking on behalf of India, the most populous country in the world, fifth largest economy, but we also had 125 countries who said, you know, speak for us.
Well, one statement, speaking of the Prime Minister, Narendra Modi, and, you know, the kind of leadership that he has shown over the last 10 years, and we are, of course, going into the elections now, is not an era of war. He said that at the SCO, he said that at the G20, and that was reflected in the consensus statement in New Delhi as well. I wouldn't ask you how difficult, you know, these 2 years have been, you know, amidst these wars between Russia and Ukraine, and now for the last 5 months between Israel and Hamas, and the position that India has taken, the independent position of self-interest, and the kind of statements that we have heard from Europe, and the kind of mirror that you have shown to the world. How important is this self-interest, not compromising, just like you said at the Munich Security Conference, that, you know, India is being smart about having multiple options?
Well, look, of course, a lot of it is about self-interest, and I see nothing wrong with self-interest. You know, all of you have self-interest you pursue every day. But at times, it's also bigger than self-interest. You know, say what I was speaking about Global South was bigger. You know, we are not a country which is deeply indebted, but we do believe countries who are something should be done for them. In the case of these issues, look, you know, eventually the stand we took looked very natural. You know, but you do go through that process of, okay, something has happened, what do we say, you know, who do we talk to, what are the pressures, the counter pressures, the arguments, and then somewhere something gels, you know, in all of this. I think in the case of Ukraine, a lot of it, I mean, we were, you know, at that time in the Security Council. Okay, so the first, I was still actually on the flight back from France, I'd been meeting Macron the previous evening. When on the plane, I saw the news that the Russians had moved in. And that Security Council meeting was actually literally happening when I was on the plane. So I could only send text messages and I mean, at least you could do that from a plane nowadays. That's a help. But from what initially became like, you know, a political, I would say, a formulation, what is the messaging you are doing, once you moved fairly quickly into the sanctioning stage, Europe deciding that it was going to take some counteraction, then it actually became a different set of issues arose. And those issues had implications for our national growth, for our development, for the average citizen of India, you know. And at that stage, that's when you actually look at your interest, you look at what others are saying, you look at, frankly, how consistent it was. And part of our problem was that, you know, the expectations of us was, I mean, here were countries who are now redirecting. They were reducing the Russia supplies. They were coming into the Middle East. They were essentially coming into markets which would have then got impacted because that's where we were buying from, who were graduating out of it, who were managing it for themselves, but were not giving you that same space. You know, their expectations of you was more than their demands of themselves. And that we felt was deeply unfair and challenged in a way.
जयशंकर जी, आपकी किताब Why Bharat Matters, उसको मैं कई जगह कोट करूंगा अभी आपसे बातचीत में, लेकिन एक जगह आपने लिखा है The world undoubtedly offers vastly more opportunities, but that is also embedded with new responsibilities. आप एक विजनरी भी हैं, मैं आपसे ये जानना चाहूंगा कि वो जिम्मेदारियां कौन सी हैं भारत के लिए, जिसके लिए हमें तैयार रहना चाहिए।
देखिए, ऐसा है कि अगर आज हम कहते हैं, अब मैं 10 साल की बात कर रहा हूं, इस दशक में क्या परिवर्तन आया है। 10 साल पहले जब पहली बार नरेंद्र मोदी प्रधानमंत्री बने थे, उस समय अगर आप हमारी इकोनॉमिक रैंकिंग देखें, 11 नंबर थे जैसे मुझे याद है। अब आप 11 नंबर इकोनॉमी से 5 नंबर इकोनॉमी बने। उसके अलावा आपकी जो छवि जो है वो इस समय उसमें परिवर्तन आया है। आप बड़े मीटिंग में अगर कोई बड़ी आइडिया है तो आपके बहुत सारे आइडियाज़ होते हैं। तो क्या होता है कि दुनिया की एक अपेक्षा होती है। आज जो हमसे जो अपेक्षा है वो पहले की अपेक्षा नहीं थी। तो आपका प्रश्न है कि ठीक है, अपेक्षा तो है, तो आप माने कॉन्क्रीट तरीके से आप इसको कैसे दर्शाएंगे। मैं कहूँगा, मैं आपको 2-3 उदाहरण देता हूँ। पिछले 10 साल में बहुत सारी संकटें आए। यमन में सिविल वॉर हुआ, नेपाल में भूकंप हुआ, श्रीलंका में लैंडस्लाइड्स हुए। अब अगर आप देखेंगे, एक ज़माना था कि कुछ भी दुर्घटना होती थी तो ज़्यादातर पश्चिमी देश जो हैं वो फर्स्ट रेस्पॉन्डर के रूप में वहाँ पहुँचते थे। अब दुनिया बदल गई है, वो लोग खुद कम कर रहे हैं। वो सोचते हैं कि भाई, आप जानते हैं कि वहाँ भी वो बदलावट आया है। सब लोग जो हैं एक किस्म से अपने बारे में ज़्यादा सोचने लगे। तो अब ये जिम्मेदारी आप ही बताइए मुझे, अगर हमारे इलाके में ऐसी कोई घटना होती है तो किसको आगे आना चाहिए। अब ये हमसे ये अपेक्षा। और तो ये एक मैं आपको उदाहरण दे रहा हूँ। दूसरा उदाहरण मैं आपको श्रीलंका का देता हूँ। पड़ोस का देश है, बहुत सारी चीज़ें हुई, कैसे हुआ क्या हुआ वो अलग बात है। पर जिस तरीके से श्रीलंका की आर्थिक सिचुएशन जो है, स्थिति जो है, माने आप रोज़ देख रहे थे कि वहाँ कुछ राइटिंग हो रही थी, खाना के लिए कुछ नहीं था, पेट्रोल नहीं था, तो वहाँ किसी को कुछ तो करना था। अब वो उनकी नेगोशिएशन IMF से चल रही थी। जो पश्चिमी देश, उन्होंने ज़्यादा कुछ किया नहीं। उनके और भी जो बड़े जिनसे उन्होंने कर्ज लिया था, वो लोग भी अपने हाथ पे बैठे रहे। अब किसी को तो आगे आना था और हम सबसे बड़े पड़ोसी देश थे। तो अगर आप देखें, हमने $4.5 बिलियन का एक पैकेज दिया था जो IMF के पैकेज से बड़ा था। तो एक ये उदाहरण ये भी है कि जहाँ युद्ध जैसे स्थिति होती है, जैसे यूक्रेन में हुआ, अब हम लोग जो है, जो हम सेल्फ इंटरेस्ट की जो बात कर रहे थे, मैं मानता हूँ कि हमारे उस समय 18-20 हज़ार विद्यार्थी थे, पर ये शुरू से हमारी ये मैं कहूँगा माइंडसेट थी, अप्रोच थी कि जब भी हम अपने लिए कुछ कर रहे हैं, वहाँ जहाज में, बगल बस में, कहीं किसी और के लिए आप भला कर सकते हैं, उनके लिए अगर दिल में जगह है तो गाड़ी में भी जगह होनी चाहिए। हाँ? और ये अगर आप देखें कितने लोग, कितने देशों के लोग हम बाहर लाए, वहाँ से भी लाए, इजराइल से भी लाए, सूडान से भी लाए। तो अब जो है दुनिया, और सबसे ज़्यादा अगर एक कोई घटना हुई है, किसी का अनुभव है जहाँ हमारी छवि बदली है, ये वैक्सीन के कारण, कि वो देश जो जहाँ वैक्सीनेशन की प्रक्रिया जारी थी, हमने खुद अपना ख़त्म नहीं किया था, तब भी हमने करीब 100 देशों को वैक्सीन दिया था। और कुछ ऐसे देश हैं जो अभी भी खड़े होकर कहते हैं कि अगर आपने नहीं दिया होता हमें कभी वैक्सीन मिलता नहीं। तो मैं कहूँगा अगर भारत की एक किस्म से नई पहचान बनी, सबसे ज़्यादा ये कोविड और वैक्सीन जो हमने, वैक्सीन मैत्री जो हमने चलाई थी, इसका सबसे ज़्यादा प्रभाव हुआ।
लेकिन अब आपकी किताब का ही मैं यहाँ पर एक कोट करूँगा। आपने कहा, इंडिया हैज़ नाउ इवॉल्व्ड इनटू एन इफेक्टिव फर्स्ट रिस्पॉन्डर इन रीजनल क्राइसिस सिचुएशंस। इंडिया मैटर्स बिकॉज इट कैन मेक अ रियल डिफरेंस टू ग्लोबल नीड्स। हम तो फर्स्ट रिस्पॉन्डर हैं और ये हम अपनी जिम्मेदारी बखूबी निभा रहे हैं, जो कि आप लोगों का जो कर्तव्य है वो दिख रहा है सब। लेकिन ऐसे में मालदीव जैसे मुल्क भी आते हैं जहां पर हम हमेशा उनकी फर्स्ट चॉइस ऑफ हेल्प रहे हैं, और वो बाद में अंदर ही अंदर वहां पर देखते हैं कि सत्ता में भारत के खिलाफ आवाजें बुलंद करना शुरू कर देते हैं। इसको लेकर भारत की नीति और सोच क्या है?
देखिए, मानवता भी मानवता होती है, कूटनीति भी कूटनीति होती है, और राजनीति भी राजनीति होती है। तो क्या होता है कि पूरी दुनिया जो है हर समय कृतज्ञता और एहसान पे नहीं चलती। ये है, अब क्या करें, सच है। तो मैं कहूँगा इस समय जब आपको लगता है कि कहीं हम ऐसी नौबत पे आ गए हैं, अब ये इसका रास्ता जो है कूटनीति ही निकालेगा। और मुझे लगता है कि अगर हम कोई भी सिचुएशन में, हमें माने समझाना चाहिए लोगों को। एक किस्म से हो सकता है कि उनको पूरी चीज़ पता भी नहीं है, कभी कभी लोग जो हैं गुमराह हो जाते हैं, कोई कुछ कह देता है। अब आपने मालदीव्स की बात की, अब मालदीव्स में हमारे 2 हेलीकॉप्टर हैं और 1 प्लेन है। और वो क्यों है? वो हैं, ज़्यादातर उनका उपयोग होता है वो मेडिकल, मेडवैक जो कहते हैं, मेडिकल इवैक्यूएशन में होता है। इसका लाभ किसको मिलता है? मालदीव्स के पब्लिक को मिलता है। अब ये हैं मिलिट्री के प्लेन, अगर मिलिट्री के प्लेन मिलिट्री वाले नहीं चलाएंगे तो कौन चलाएगा? वही चलाएंगे, वो तो स्वाभाविक है। अब अगर उनको इस पर कोई एतराज़ है तो हमने कहा ठीक है, बैठ जाइए, हम इसका सुझाव निकालते हैं, और हम निकालेंगे ज़रूर। तो ये कभी कभी हो जाता है, जैसे मैंने कहा कि जो भी आप कहें, जितने माने हमारी नीयत साफ हो, नीति स्पष्ट हो, तब भी कभी कभी ये हम ऐसे सिचुएशन में आ जाते कि हमें इसका कहीं ना कहीं सुझाव निकालना पड़ता है। और मुझे विश्वास है कि हम इसको माने इसका सोल्यूशन हम निकाल पाएंगे।
We have just a few more quick questions, Minister Jaishankar. This morning we had Prime Minister Tony Abbott speaking as the global keynote here at the TV9 Global Summit, and he emphasized, and he has been famously quoted in saying that India is an upcoming democratic superpower. He's also famously said last year that India, he would like to see India as this 21st century as the India century. And it's better than having the Chinese century. So the question to you, sir, is How does one deal with China? How have you been dealing with China over the years? Because he said, if you have to tackle China, a bully, then you have to stand up to the bully. We've faced China in different capacities. We've also, given an olive branch. We've had the Chennai Connect, the Wuhan spirit. But is that the thing of the past? Post 2019, 2020, is there a new policy towards China, and what's the road ahead?
It's interesting. We've had ups and downs, but at one level, there is actually a consistency. And the consistency is this. If you were to, list 3 or 4 really big things which have changed in the last 20, 25 years, I think most people would agree it would be the rise of China and the rise of India. Okay. You can say, okay, China started it much earlier because, our own politics here delayed the era of reform. That's okay. What's done is done. Now, but there's no question, both countries are rising. And for world politics, this poses a very interesting problem. The problem is this. Both are changing the world order by their rise. So each one has an impact vis-a-vis the world. But they also happen to be neighbors. So their relationship is also changing while it's changing vis-a-vis the rest of the world. Okay? It makes it, therefore, very complicated to create an equilibrium. How do, so it's like this is dynamic, that is dynamic. How do they maintain stability while both are moving vis-a-vis the world order? And we tried initially to, because, there were understandings in the 1990s, to manage the line of actual control, the border areas, and to build the rest of the relationship. We tried to maintain that equilibrium naturally first through diplomacy. So what you saw at Wuhan and Mamallapuram, etc., was that equilibrium maintenance exercise. I wasn't at Wuhan, I was in Mamallapuram, and there was very frank talking, between the leaders. But what happened in 2020 was China, for whatever reason, chose to move military forces in disregard of agreements. Now, that called for a different response for the equilibrium. So the logical thing for us to do, which is what we did, was we moved up forces in a very big way. So from 2020, you have an equilibrium, one part of which is the military posture on the border, in the border areas. One part of it is today, obviously, a political relationship impacted by this border situation. One part of it is also the economic measures we have taken. Because, if there is a country today which is trying to put me under pressure, I should rightfully take economic precautions vis-a-vis this country. And in any case, we believe, this government believes that the interests of our working class, the interests of our small enterprises, the interests of our industries must be protected against unfair competition. So there are also measures which tie in against that. So our effort today is, we have to build the deep strengths. We have to create our digital capabilities, our telecom, our manufacturing, our pharma industry, our health self-sufficiency, our defense industry, our ability to deploy on the border, which you can only do if you build the infrastructure. So in the past, till 2014, our average expenditure on the China border was about 3,500 crores. Today it is almost 15,000 crores. So there was a neglect of the border infrastructure. You can't defend your border if you don't build the infrastructure there.
One of the problem areas, Dr. Jaishankar, in the past few years has been the Khalistani separatism and terrorism that has emanated probably from Canada, but also to an extent from UK, from US, and from Australia. You've been dealing with that. But in particular, post the G20, the India-Canada ties have suffered. Perhaps there is some backroom dialogue that is underway. We had stopped visas. Well, I see that smile there. I don't know how much you can say, but people want to know, and perhaps in the audience as well, there are quite a few who have suffered because they are not getting visas on time, and there are delays that are happening on the Canadian side. But when will this provocation really end, particularly from Canada? And do you think there is growing understanding, at least from the Canadian politicians, or is this just political compulsion for them to just let this Khalistani separatism be, because it is becoming snakes in their backyard movement, just like Pakistan for Canada?
Well, look, first of all, let me say this regarding visas, okay? We had to suspend the issue of visas in Canada because our diplomats were not safe going to work. Our diplomats were repeatedly threatened. They were intimidated in many ways, and we got very little comfort from the Canadian system at that time. It has improved since then. So we reached a stage where, as a minister, I could not risk, exposing my diplomats to the kind of violence which was very clearly prevalent in Canada at that time. So but that part of it has been rectified. So today, our visa operations are pretty much normal. Now, regarding the space which has been given to Khalistanis, to extremists of various kinds. Look, they keep telling us, we are a democracy, there's freedom of speech, and therefore people, say these things. Now, freedom of speech cannot extend to intimidating diplomats who are doing their duty, throwing smoke bombs into embassies and consulates, actually advocating violence and separatism against a friendly state. To me, this is not freedom of speech, this is misuse of freedom of speech. Now, we've had this to different degrees in different countries. In the UK, we saw actually our High Commission being, attacked by mobs. And honestly, we didn't get the kind of protection which we expected to get. And to a point of someone actually physically climbing into our High Commission and bringing down the Indian flag. Now, I asked my colleagues, let's put ourselves in each other's shoes. How would you react if a mob came and did something to one of your diplomatic premises somewhere in the world? You wouldn't say, oh, there's freedom of speech and freedom of assembly and freedom of expression. You'd be jumping up and down. So the whole point, now again, things have improved in UK. So the point is, we find today that in many countries, we've had a much firmer response in Australia and in the US. Okay. We had an arson attack in US, but that is under investigation. And we expect that the US, if a receiving state does not investigate and take action against someone who attacks an embassy or a consulate, there is a message in it. Now, I don't think it's good for any of these countries to send that kind of message for their own reputation. So we expect the culprits in the attack in our consulate in San Francisco to be brought to book. We expect action against people who stormed into our High Commission in London. We expect people who threaten our diplomats, who put up posters. They put up posters of our diplomats with urging people to be violent against them. Now, just imagine if roles were reversed.
जयशंकर जी, आपको सुनने के बाद अब हमें समझ में आ रहा है कि भारत की जो एक assertiveness है, उसके पीछे का राज क्या है। आपका और प्रधानमंत्री मोदी का बहुत-बहुत शुक्रिया, जिस तरीके से विदेश के मंच पर भारत की अभी एक प्रतिष्ठा बनती जा रही है और हम आगे बढ़ते जा रहे हैं। और आप सभी लोगों से मैं पुनः बोलूँगा, वो किताब ज़रूर पढ़ें, Why Bharat Matters, because it actually makes a big difference in understanding आगे क्या हो रहा है और अभी क्या है। बहुत-बहुत शुक्रिया हमारे साथ जुड़ने के लिए, आपका बहुत आभार। जोरदार तालियों से एक बार फिर।
Many thanks to Honorable Jaishankar.
Thank you so much, sir. Give it up, ladies and gentlemen, one more time for Dr. S. Jaishankar, External Affairs Minister of India. All right then, ladies and gentlemen, even as the photo ops continue and the conversations are almost about concluded, India under Prime Minister Narendra Modi has charted a course of Atmanirbhar or self-reliance with a greater than ever push on domestic defense manufacturing to further add firepower to India's armed forces, be it the DRDO test facilities that have been opened to industries for utilization or projects like Make-I, technology innovation for defense excellence, the IDEX. I mean, these are all positive tailwinds for India. On that note, let's drone in the next session. Ladies and gentlemen, Chief Executive of General Atomics Global Corporation, Vivek Lal, requesting TV9 Networks, R. Sridharan and Neha Khanna to conduct this keynote interview. Vivek Lal, would you please come here up on stage? A big round of applause for Vivek Lal, ladies and gentlemen.